Imagine jumping out of a plane into the pitch-black abyss over occupied France, knowing that if you land off target, if a single beam of light finds you, or if a sound alerts a nearby German patrol, your life and the fate of the entire Allied invasion hangs by a thread. This was the nightly reality for the Jedburghs, the legendary three-man teams of spies, soldiers, and saboteurs who launched a secret war for the soul of France. Forget the neat lines of the D-Day maps. The real liberation of Europe was fought in the shadows, on dusty French roads, and in remote villages, organized by some of the most extraordinary soldiers you've never heard of. Their mission, known simply as Operation Jedburgh, was arguably the most critical, high-risk intelligence and sabotage operation of World War II. It was a fusion of daring, deception, and cold-blooded strategy designed to ensure that when the Allied boots hit the Normandy beaches, Hitler would be fighting a war on two fronts, the coast and the entire French interior. The story of the Jedburghs is a tale of unprecedented international cooperation, personal courage bordering on madness, and a spectacular military success born from a strategy of maximum risk. It is a true American story, forged in the crucible of Allied necessity. The problem: an invasion too exposed. By late 1943, the Allied invasion of Europe, codenamed Operation Overlord, D-Day, was inevitable, but the planning tables in London were plagued by a single, terrifying vulnerability: logistics. The Normandy beaches, where the invasion would land, were hundreds of miles from the German heartland. The Allies would need to move millions of gallons of fuel, hundreds of thousands of tons of ammunition, and thousands of vehicles and men from the beaches to the front lines. This supply network, stretching across France, was known as the Red Ball Express. If the Germans could successfully disrupt those supply lines by blowing up bridges, derailing trains, or ambushing convoys, the entire invasion would stall, and the consequences would be catastrophic. General Dwight Eisenhower and his staff realized that they couldn't possibly dedicate enough conventional troops to guard every single mile of French railway, road, and bridge. They needed a force multiplier, a secret army that already existed behind enemy lines. They needed the French resistance. The resistance, or the Maquis, was a fractured, decentralized, and often poorly armed collection of patriots, communists, and farmers. They possessed the willpower, but they lacked the training, the weapons, and, most crucially, the coordinated command structure to turn their passion into a strategic military asset. This is where the Jedburghs came in. The birth of the Jedburghs, a new kind of soldier. The concept was simple in its elegance, but brutal in its execution. Drop small, self-contained teams of highly trained multilingual specialists into France to serve as the nervous system for the entire resistance movement. These teams were assembled at a secret training base in the British countryside, a facility disguised as a farm. The program was a joint effort between the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, and the French Bureau Central de Renseignement et Action, BCRA. The unit was named Jedburgh, after the Scottish border town where many of the initial trainees were stationed. Their selection criteria were impossibly high. Trilingual. Every member had to be fluent in English, French, and German, or at least understand German military terms. Military expertise. They had to be experts in demolitions, small unit tactics, and guerrilla warfare. The X factor. They needed ice-cold nerves, exceptional communication skills, and the ability to operate entirely without support, knowing capture meant torture and execution by the Gestapo. A Jedburgh team was always composed of three men: the commander, typically British or American; the military planner, usually a captain or a major responsible for the team's security and tactical decisions; the executive officer, always French, the vital link to the local Maquis commander. This man spoke the language, knew the local customs, and provided the necessary legitimacy. He was the most vulnerable, as his capture meant immediate recognition as a traitor. The RO, the linchpin. Usually a sergeant, the RO carried the sole means of communication, a heavy temperament radio, the B2 or suitcase set. Without him, the team was deaf and mute, and the entire resistance network was useless. Their mission was clearly defined: organize, arm, and coordinate. They were to rally the local Maquis, identify strategic targets, bridges, rail lines, power grids, secure dropping zones, DZs, for Allied supply parachutes, and then, at a moment's notice, execute a massive coordinated campaign of strategic sabotage to coincide with the D-Day landings. The drop into the dark. Between June 5, 1944 and September 1944, 93 Jedburgh teams, 279 men, parachuted into France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The vast majority went into France immediately following D-Day. The atmosphere on the eve of a jump was a cocktail of adrenaline and dread. The jump was always made at night, usually with a full moon, for minimal visibility, yet enough light to spot the DZ. The briefing was simple. You will jump between 800 and 1200 feet. Your primary mission is to live. If you are caught, you know the drill. The drill was the cyanide capsule carried in a hidden pouch. Each man jumped with his parachute, a Sten gun, a small pack, and essential gear. The crucial equipment, the radio, medical supplies, and weapons crates were dropped separately. The landing was often disastrous. Many teams landed miles from their intended drop zone, sometimes directly into enemy territory. One American team, Jedburgh Hugh, landed near a German anti-aircraft battery. Another, Jedburgh Alec, landed in a river. The first few hours were a desperate scramble to hide parachutes, retrieve containers, and establish contact with the local resistance leader, who was identified by a pre-arranged code freeze. The RO's first task was often the most dangerous, setting up the radio. The B2 suitcase set was heavy, requiring a large aerial wire to be strung up, a beacon of potential discovery. Transmitting was done only at pre-arranged times and always for less than 20 minutes, which was the maximum estimated time before a German direction-finding truck could triangulate the signal. Every transmission was a gamble with death. The French interior erupted. The strategic brilliance of the Jedburgh operation became evident almost immediately after the June 6, 1944 landings in Normandy. The teams fanned out across France, transforming the Maquis from a passionate but disorganized mob into a devastating fourth arm of the Allied invasion. The American commanders, often in their early 20s, found themselves leading forces 10 or 20 times their size. They trained farmers, shopkeepers, and students in the art of the plastic explosive and the delay fuse. Their core directives were surgical and strategic. Rail interdiction. This was the paramount goal. The Jedburgh-led resistance executed an astonishing campaign of railway sabotage, derailing hundreds of German trains. The objective wasn't just to destroy the trains, but to clog the main lines, preventing German reinforcements and armor from reaching the battlefronts in Normandy. Every single German division that attempted to move west to counter the invasion was significantly delayed and often crippled by the time it arrived. One of the most famous examples of this strategic effect was Jedburgh Team Hugh. Dropped into the Limousin region, they immediately... The American Heroes and the Shadow War. The stories of the individual American Jedburghs read like fiction, though they are terrifyingly real. Consider Lieutenant Colonel John K. Singlaub, one of the first OSS officers on the ground in France. Parachuted in with Team James, Singlaub was a master of unconventional warfare. He spent weeks evading capture, coordinating massive arms drops from the air, and directing demolition teams against key bridges. He was known for his almost reckless courage, often personally leading raids to establish credibility with the local resistance leaders, who were sometimes skeptical of the Americans from London. Or Major H.K. Davis, who led Team Mark. Dropped into the Rhone Valley, Davis found a chaotic, poorly supplied resistance unit. Within days, he had them organized, trained, and armed with parachute drops of hundreds of Sten guns and bazookas.
Under his direction, the Maquis were able to hold a significant sector of the valley for weeks, cutting off German retreats and capturing hundreds of German prisoners, all while wearing the uniform of a U.S. Army major, fully exposed as the highest value target in the region. The Jedburghs didn't just fight the German army, they fought the Gestapo and the SD, security service, whose methods were brutal and efficient. The Jedburghs' survival depended on the absolute loyalty of the local French population, and that loyalty was frequently tested under torture. The constant tension of the Jedburgh mission was not the large-scale battle, but the daily crushing fear of betrayal. Every farmhouse, every quiet woods, and every helpful villager could be a trap. The Jedburghs lived on pure adrenaline, sleeping fully clothed with their weapons at hand, often going for days without a proper meal or rest. The RO especially carried a unique burden. If the radio was lost or captured, the entire network, hundreds of Maquis fighters and their families, was instantly exposed. The American heroes in the Shadow War. The stories of the individual American Jedburghs read like fiction, though they are terrifyingly real. Consider Lieutenant Colonel John K. Singlaub, one of the first OSS officers on the ground in France. Parachuted in with Team James, Singlaub was a master of unconventional warfare. He spent weeks evading capture, coordinating massive arms drops from the air, and directing demolition teams against key bridges. He was known for his almost reckless courage, often personally leading raids to establish credibility with the local resistance leaders, who were sometimes skeptical of the Americans from London. Or Major H.K. Davis, who led Team Mark. Dropped into the Rhone Valley, Davis found a chaotic, poorly supplied resistance unit. Within days, he had them organized, trained, and armed with parachute drops of hundreds of Sten guns and bazookas. Under his direction, the Maquis were able to hold a significant sector of the valley for weeks, cutting off German retreats and capturing hundreds of German prisoners, all while wearing the uniform of a U.S. Army major, fully exposed as the highest value target in the region. The Jedburghs didn't just fight the German army, they fought the Gestapo and the SD, security service, whose methods were brutal and efficient. The Jedburgh survival depended on the absolute loyalty of the local French population, and that loyalty was frequently tested under torture. The constant tension of the Jedburgh mission was not the large-scale battle, but the daily crushing fear of betrayal. Every farmhouse, every quiet woods, and every helpful villager could be a trap. The Jedburghs lived on pure adrenaline, sleeping fully clothed with their weapons at hand, often going for days without a proper meal or rest. The RO especially carried a unique burden. If the radio was lost or captured, the entire network, hundreds of Maquis fighters and their families, was instantly exposed. The cost and the triumph. The Jedburgh operation was not without its heavy costs. Over 100 Jedburghs were killed, captured, or wounded during the 3-month operation. For the Maquis they commanded, the casualty rate was far higher. Yet their impact was disproportionately huge. The coordinated uprising engineered by the Jedburgh teams accomplished what conventional forces could not. Crippling German mobility. By the time of the breakout from Normandy, the French railway system was so thoroughly damaged that German troop and supply movements were reduced to a crawl. The ability of the Germans to shift forces from the south and east to the main battlefront was annihilated. Intelligence goldmine. The Jedburghs were also key intelligence gatherers, confirming troop movements and placements which they radioed back to London, feeding crucial real-time data to Eisenhower's headquarters. The Paris Uprising. As the Allies advanced, it was the Jedburgh-trained resistance forces that rose up to fight the Germans in Paris in August 1944. This internal revolt forced the Germans to dedicate resources to suppressing the uprising, accelerating the Allied push, and saving the city from a planned scorched earth destruction by the retreating German commander. The Maquis delivered Paris intact to the Allies. The official military history credits the Jedburghs and the resistance with achieving a 6-week acceleration of the final Allied advance toward the German border. The time bought by their sabotage campaigns and the divisions they held in the interior allowed the Allies to consolidate their foothold in Normandy, turn the tide of the war, and race across France. Aftermath, recognition, and legacy. As Allied troops swept across France, the Jedburghs often emerged from the shadows, suddenly appearing in liberated towns to greet the astonished main force. Their uniforms were ragged, their beards long, and their eyes reflecting months of terror and triumph. They had fought and won their private war. After the liberation, the remaining Jedburghs were immediately pulled out, sworn to secrecy, and scattered back to their parent units. For decades, their mission remained classified. The American officers who directed guerrilla wars from hidden forests in France were told to simply forget it happened. Today, the legacy of the Jedburghs is recognized as a cornerstone of modern special operations. Their methodology, small, integrated, high-impact teams of international specialists coordinating indigenous forces, became the blueprint for Green Berets, Delta Force, and CIA Special Activities Division operations in conflicts ranging from Vietnam to Afghanistan. The Jedburghs were the first true American special forces in the modern sense. Soldiers who fought not with superior numbers, but with superior cunning, communication, and courage. They were the few hundred men who fought a shadow war in the French darkness, whose exploits remain one of the most astonishing, high-stakes, and ultimately successful chapters in American military history.